Hi, and welcome back to the Crew Invest Studios, where today we'll be discussing and unpacking a decision that's on many investors' minds, and that's whether we use our hard-earned or saved funds to invest in a unit trust balance fund or purchase an investment property. The simple case study we're going to be going through today is that John Smith has saved up or inherited 4 million rand, and he is now faced with this tough decision. Does he purchase an investment property or invest the funds in a balanced fund unit trust?
Investing in a unit trust portfolio is relatively simple. Once you've got your FICA documents together and selected a fund, you can kind of go from there. So what we've got on the screen today is a balanced fund, and as you can see, we've assumed that the net return of the balanced fund is inflation plus 5.1%. On the right-hand side, we have asset allocation of a balanced fund.
Hannah, I notice in that asset allocation that the balanced fund doesn't have a large portion of property as an asset class.
In these balanced funds, the portfolio managers have full discretion as to where the funds are invested. As you can see, they've decided that the risk-return trade-off in property is not favorable in these investments. In a unit trust investment, there is certain taxes to consider, such as interest income, which forms part of your taxable income.
So now that we understand the landscape of what an investor or John Smith might expect from this balanced fund and what his long-term expected net return might be, let's dive into the scenario where he decides to go the other route and purchase an investment property. So we've just set the scene a bit and made a few assumptions. You can see that we've assumed John is earning 30,000 Rand per month or 360 a year before tax. Any property buyer needs to pay conveyancing fees and transfer duty. With the 4 million Rand that he has available, we've assumed he needs to sink about 300,000 Rand of these funds into these sunk costs. So his property purchase is going to be for about 3.7 million Rand. We've given him the benefit of the doubt and assumed a rental return of 22,500 Rand per month. So if John had to do the maths behind what his net return on this investment would be, you could see that if he took this 270,000 Rand that he would earn per year as a rental and expressed it as a proportion on the 3.7 million Rand property value, you can see there that he would expect a return of 7.2%. However, what John hasn't done is taken the sunk cost into consideration. So expressed over the total investment of 4 million Rand, this equates to 6.75% as a return. Now, just to unpack how we view the overall return of a property, this 7.25 or 6.75% return is the return above inflation that John would expect. On a long-term average, property as an asset class, the capital value of property is expected to keep pace with inflation globally. However, it is important to remember, as I'm sure all of you property owners out there might have experienced, this isn't always the case, and just an important factor to take into consideration. Talking about important factors to take into consideration, to work out the net return that John's going to experience from this investment property, there's a whole bunch of other points that we need to consider. So you can see on the screen now some of these considerations that need to be factored in, namely rates, taxes, levies, the home insurance, maintenance, tenant risk, and of course the tax that John's going to pay on that rental income that he's going to receive. So just to unpack a few of these, obviously the rates and taxes, that's going to be dependent on the property and the area that you purchase your property in. And we've just taken a market average on a property valued at 3.7. House insurance, same thing, market average. Maintenance, we know it doesn't happen in a straight line, but we know from experience and the long-term expectation is that property owners will pay between 0.5% to 1% of the capital value of the property as a maintenance expense on an annual basis. Tenant risk is an interesting one because obviously this is probably one of the biggest risks that a rental property owner might face. It's that trade-off where if you have a poor tenant who doesn't pay, obviously you're not getting your rental yield, whereas if you have a good tenant, often you want to reward them by not increasing your rental charges on an annual basis by inflation. So the long-term average is that we expect property to only have 11.5 months rental yield. So that's been factored in as a tenant risk. And then obviously the income tax would be the tax that John is going to pay on the additional income he's going to receive from that property. When you take all of that into consideration, right there at the bottom, you can see the net yield that John is going to expect to receive from this rental property. And this just calls into question, is the return we're going to get from a rental property really that much better than we can expect from an investment portfolio? And there's a few other things to take into consideration, liquidity being one of the biggest ones. Unfortunately, you can't chip away a few bricks of your property, if you have some unexpected bills, if your tenant isn't paying. While a lot of the discussion has been around making the decision before purchasing an investment property, it is important to remember for any investment property owners out there that this is an exercise that you should run on an ongoing basis. Economic environments change, as I'm sure you're aware, property values go up and down, and depending on what rent you're charging and earning, whether you've increased it or kept it steady, whether your property value's gone up or down, your net return on your property is going to change on an ongoing basis. And these kind of exercises need to be done to make sure that you're still making the right decision with your investment and whether it still makes sense to keep hold of the property.
Again, this isn't a conversation about leveraging and taking out money from the bank to purchase a property, but rather what to do with the funds that you have at hand. Should you invest them or should you purchase an investment property? While South Africans love property and they feel as though they can feel it and see it and trust it, it's important to take into account all of these considerations that Devon's discussed today before purchasing a property or making an investment.